What's up, everybody? In this video, I want to talk about why I cannot stand the rematch between Yair Rodriguez and Brian Ortega that goes down February 24th for the UFC Mexico card. Guys, we have got to stop hyping up this fight. And I shouldn't say hyping up this fight. I know we are fight fans. We always look forward to fights. But I should say we should stop hyping up how good of a matchup this actually is, right? Let me refresh your memory and take you back to the last time Brian Ortega competed, which was against Yair Rodriguez. And this fight, people seem to just have some sort of delusional memory of how this fight was playing out. This was total domination by Yair Rodriguez. He was piecing apart Brian Ortega on the feet. Ortega was desperately trying to close the distance, slowly pressing forward, eating crazy shots from Yair. Yair landed a beautiful right hand that kind of spun the head of Brian Ortega. Ortega gets a hold of him, takes him down, and then the shoulder situation happens. I know that Brian Ortega has outstanding jiu-jitsu. He has outstanding submissions. That's what Brian Ortega is known for. But just based off of the position and what we've seen from Yair's really dangerous off of his back. Yair not only has submissions, he has very good up kicks. He's very wiry and squirmy, and he's able to get back to the feet or get his back up against the fence and kind of work his way out of there. And he was landing some nasty shots from the bottom. People are acting like this fight was some dogfight back and forth. First of all, I also don't like the fact that these guys are friends. I don't know if you all know that, but these guys are friends. They didn't want to fight each other in the first place. And the UFC was basically like, title stakes are on this fight. And that worked out for Yair. He goes on, he fights Alexander Volkanovski, or he goes on and fights Josh Emmett for the interim belt, and goes on and fights Alexander Volkanovski. But what we're looking at here is Brian Ortega is in the top 5. He's ranked number 3, tied for Honor and Allen. I didn't even know we could have a tie inside the top 5 for the rankings, but apparently we can in the UFC. But at the end of the day, this is not a good matchup, guys. This isn't a good matchup. And this matchup could take place and I could eat my words. I really think that Yair Rodriguez dominates Brian Ortega from start to finish. Yair Rodriguez's striking is far better than Brian Ortega's. Does Brian Ortega have the submission advantage? Sure, he does. Does he have the takedown advantage? Maybe. I'll give him the takedown advantage. But as far as submissions, Yair Rodriguez jiu-jitsu has came a long way. Yair Rodriguez, I know that Volk took him down and was able to beat up on him, but at the end of the day, that was Volk hurting him on the feet. Brian Ortega does not have that kind of stand-up. Unless Brian Ortega's been in the lab this whole time and his striking comes out and looks a hell of a lot different, this fight goes the same way. This is Yair Rodriguez floating around on the outside, stinging Brian Ortega as Brian Ortega's kind of just walking forward, eating shots, and Brian Ortega is very durable. The dude's a warrior. I'm not crapping on Brian Ortega. I think the dude's a sensational fighter. It's just Brian Ortega shouldn't even be in the top 5. The fact that he's still ranked I shouldn't say that he's still ranked. He should be at the back end of the rankings. Let's be honest. He shouldn't be in the top 5. He hasn't been active. I get that he's been hurt. But it's been one thing after another in terms of long layoffs for Brian Ortega. It seems like he's got some things going on, injuries and whatever have you. And I understand that. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to refresh everyone's memory. I recently rewatched this fight again, too, to make sure I wasn't, maybe having a crazy take. Yair Rodriguez is just flat out better than Brian Ortega. And I know that people are going to bring up the submission that Brian Ortega had on Volkanovski, how he was very close to becoming the champ. But outside of that moment, was Volkanovski not controlling the fight and winning the fight? For the most part, yeah. Was Yair Rodriguez not controlling and winning the fight against Brian Ortega? Yeah, just because Yair Rodriguez was on his back doesn't mean anything. We've seen Yair Rodriguez on his back. We've seen him throw vicious up kicks. We've seen him submit people or put people in submissions to where they get up and back out of it because they're like, I'm in a lot of trouble here. And then they let Yair back to his feet. But on the feet, this is a huge mismatch. Brian Ortega is not a striker. His striking did improve. It has gotten better throughout his career. But at the end of the day, he looked good against a Korean Zombie. And Korean Zombie, yes, Korean Zombie is good. And he was kind of getting towards the tail end. We saw the reinvented Brian Ortega, the bald-headed Brian Ortega that came out there and looked really good. But at the end of the day, guys, Yair Rodriguez is leaps and bounds ahead of Brian Ortega in terms of the striking. Now, the grappling, sure, Brian Ortega can get a hold of him. He can snatch his neck, put him in a guillotine, if he's able to get Yair down, Yair tries to look for a scramble, Brian pulls guard, submits him, via triangle or something like that. I totally can see that happening. I just find it highly unlikely. I think Yair is very motivated here, especially depending on what goes down at UFC 298. If Yair comes off an impressive win against Brian Ortega, if Ilia Topuria wins the strap, there's an argument that Yair Rodriguez is going to be fighting Ilia Topuria for the belt next, or maybe if it's close with Volk it's the rematch or something along those lines. It's a huge matchup. Yair's going to come in refreshed. I think Yair's going to come in with a point to prove. I know that him and Brian Ortega are friends. They like each other. They didn't want to fight each other. I don't like the matchup. And what's even odder is the fact that this matchup is going to be the co-headliner. Like, I like Brandon Moreno and all, but like the UFC started doing this thing where the heavier weight classes, they're the ones that are towards the top of the card, especially on fight nights, man. And so, like, the fact that a flyweight fight is going to headline over a featherweight fight, I think says a little something here about this matchup between Ortega and Yair Rodriguez. I mean, I understand that Brandon Moreno's he's the big star. Like, I get that. Amir Albazi, it's a good fight. I got it. But Brian Ortega and Yair Rodriguez, like, what's the point of making these two fight again? I don't understand. This matchup makes no sense. I don't like the matchup. What do you all think? Feel free to comment below. I'm open to hearing what you all have to say. Just, this is my opinion, guys. I don't understand. When this was rebooked, I just sighed. I'm like, why? Literally, why? There are plenty of other fights that we could give Yair Rodriguez. There's plenty of other fights that we could give Brian Ortega. Like, why not have Brian Ortega fight Arnold Allen and they could battle for that number 3 spot since they're both tied? Like, I don't understand. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I know that would create some issues in terms of matchups for Yair Rodriguez. Maybe you give Brian Ortega someone that's not in the top 5, and then we give Arnold Allen Yair Rodriguez. But there's no looking back now. This is the matchup that's booked. It's still entertaining. We'll still all be tuning in. But at the end of the day, I don't think that we should be getting all excited for this matchup, thinking that we're going to see some sort of spectacle here. I think that this is very cut and dry, very straightforward. Yair Rodriguez is absolutely the better overall fighter. Now, that's not to say that Brian Ortega can't win this matchup. If Ortega does win this fight, there will be no surprise. It's by a submission. He's not going to outpoint Yair Rodriguez, and he is certainly not going to knock out Yair Rodriguez. So at the end of the day, I'll leave it in your hands. What do you guys think? Is this a great matchup? Did you guys want to see this fight? Because I can assure you, I didn't, but who am I? Like, subscribe, help your boy out. See you in the next one.